The battle for the NFC has officially begun. What did we just watch yesterday? And the worst thing you could have let me do is sleep on this and get my thoughts intact, because I got a lot of things on my mind. I got a lot to talk about, and I'm ready to go at it. I'm ready to battle. And okay, let's look at it, because we got three teams featured in today's video. We got the San Francisco 49ers, we got the Philadelphia Eagles, and we got the Detroit Lions. All three teams who are 5-1, all three teams who have a good body of work, playing good to elite football. Those are the teams we're talking about today. All my Dallas Cowboys fans, I want to see what you do tonight. I think you have an extremely talented roster, but I want to see Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, some of those other guys, Mike McCarthy. How do you bounce back? How do you look against an LA Chargers team who I think also has something to them? So we're going to hold that thought off just for a bit. It's not saying that you're not a team who can compete, but not for this video, all right? And also, two honorable mentions. The Seattle Seahawks, if Pete Carroll can stay out of the way, and the LA Rams. I think the LA Rams, although they're not having the best record, I still think they're a very good football team. When I look at Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp has came back from his injury, and he's looking like a guy who was the same person who won the Triple Crown. I'm seeing that just fresh off of the injury. I'm seeing Matthew Stafford. He's always going to throw at least one interception, but even when he's clicking and when he throws that one interception, he can still keep those guys in a football game. So I'm looking at a team who they've came to a position where you lose some of those guys on defense with the LA Rams, and it's getting harder to really win those games, albeit with Matthew Stafford throwing those picks. So I want to see what they continue to do, but I really like that team. I think they're playing some good football, but the record is not a reflection. But forget all that. Let's get into what we're talking about today. And like I said, I got three teams: Detroit, San Fran, and Philadelphia. But I want to start off with Philadelphia and talk about them first, because this was a team who I did the video. If you follow this channel, you probably saw that video, because I felt like the 49ers were the best team in the NFL by a comfortable margin. And just seeing how that game went, it was kind of shocking to me, and it felt like I jinxed it. But before I get into the 49ers in its totality, I want to talk about PJ Walker and the job that he did. Although he didn't go out there and throw the bombs off of the roof, he didn't do that. But I'm looking at the collective body of work with the defense. Now, we got to understand one thing. The Cleveland Browns, and by a comfortable margin, they have the best defense in the NFL. Statistically, total yards allowed, they're number one. And about 60 yards ahead, that's the Philadelphia Eagles. So we're not coming in here like we're not playing guys with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. We're not coming like we're not playing Dalvin Tomlinson, Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and Martin Emerson Jr. Hey, that's a corner out of Mississippi State. I'm seeing him balling in his second year. I got to give my hats off to him. So I'm seeing all of those things that are working, and I'm saying, okay, great performance. But getting back to PJ Walker, all he had to do was be a good wingman in that game. He came out there and they said, Kevin Stefanski, all of the guys, you don't have Nick Chubb and you don't have Joel Bettino. But what we're going to do for you, and you're fresh off of the couch, you're coming, we had Dorian Thomas-Robinson, we didn't feel comfortable with his performance, so we brought in PJ Walker. And all you got to do is throw the football, be the point guard. Now, he had 2 interceptions, but outside of that, okay, we're going to give you Amari Cooper. We're going to give you Elijah Moore. We're going to give you Jerome Ford, who's playing some good football. Outside of that, you still got Jedrick Willis. You still got Wyatt Teller. You got a lot of pieces, David Njoku. You got a lot of pieces to really work with if you're PJ Walker stepping into this battle. So I'm looking at all of that and saying, hats off to him. He did what he had to do. And when you're the wingman, all you do is get the information and you try your best not to mess it up. He did his best not to mess it up and put them in a position to where if Brock Purdy drives this football down the football field and they miss that field goal, we're still going to win the ball game. Now, Jake Moody, and I'm not jumping too much on Jake Moody because outside of this game, he's been playing pretty solid. But you draft the kicker in the third. That's just kind of startling to me. You draft the kicker in the third round. Now, he had an extensive resume at the University of Michigan, looking at everything, All-American, he had everything that we could talk about. But coming into San Francisco and getting into that situation, you just want to see a guy who you drafted. You usually don't draft kickers. Justin Tucker, we don't see those types of guys just being drafted. If you do draft a kicker, it's probably 7th round, something like that. So I'm looking at all of those things, and I still think he's a good kicker. You just had a bad day. You got to make that kick right there to win the game. Even though you missed the 54-yarder earlier, come back with that one. Now, the weather in that game was crazy, but that's just some overall thoughts that I had before we get into Brock Purdy, because I know a lot of people are talking about Brock Purdy, and I think that I'm confused a little bit because I'm seeing a lot of contradictory takes. If we're going to say that it takes a body of work to be elite, how does it take one game to not be elite? How does it take one game to not be a good quarterback? If we were just saying he was playing at an extremely high level, how does one game supersede his entire body of work? I'm looking at all of those games. I'm looking at the games last year before he hurt his elbow. I'm looking at the games this year before yesterday. Elite body of work. He's putting in the work. He's making the decisions. Now, he missed some throws. I think we could still say, he had a struggling game, but he's still a good quarterback. I think two things can be true sometimes, and those two things are true. He missed some deep throws. He missed Ayuk a couple times. He missed Kittle a couple times, but he still is a good quarterback. So you want to see all of those things. And even with that being said, he drove the football in the last drive. And yes, yards after catch. Shout out Brandon Ayuk. That's his job. So seeing all of those things happen, I think that you had a bad day. You had a rough day. I'm not saying the weather played too much into it, but we look at some of those things. He was struggling to grip the football. And then when it stopped raining, he was still missing a couple throws. So you look at the film, you watch that, and you got to come back. I'm not swinging one way. I'm not saying he's the best quarterback in the league. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback just off this game, but he did not have a good game. That can be true as well. So I think that when I look at some of the stats in the game, 3 of 12 on third down. That's not like San Francisco. 3 sacks allowed. Like I said, that defensive line, they get after it. It's Darius Smith. Myles Garrett is the bookend. 12 penalties, though. That is something that has to be cleaned up. Undisciplined. We don't want to see that from San Francisco. And they didn't really lose the time of possession too bad. Only lost it. Really, the Cleveland Browns had 6 more minutes of time of possession. So I'm looking at that, and that's something that I pay attention to. But Brock Purdy, 12 of 27, 125 yards, 1 touchdown. That was the Christian McCaffrey pass and 1 interception. Looking at all of these things playing into each other, and they got 108 yards on the ground, but the run game couldn't really get going. Outside of Christian McCaffrey, if we take him away, he didn't have much going in the run game. And of course, he got hurt. Deebo Samuel got hurt. So we're looking at those different things. But two things can be true as well. Cleveland Browns has some guys out. Even if you feel like it's not the equivalent manner of guys, it's still guys out for both teams. Yes, the Golden State Warriors are the Golden State Warriors. But if you lose to Klay Thompson, if you lose to Andrew Wiggins, and you got Curry and Draymond, are you still that same team? You're still a good team, but this is not the team that you envisioned, the team that you schemed and practiced with to really build a championship dynasty. So I'm looking at those different types of things. And Jim Schwartz, shout out to him, 8-1 versus Kyle Shanahan. That's huge, but you just wonder, how does he have our number like that? But one thing I do want to talk about, statistically, even after yesterday, this is a team, they're 3rd in total defense, elite, 6th in rush defense, 10th in pass defense, 1st in scoring defense still, 7th in total offense, and 2nd in scoring. So you're looking at those statistics within the body of work. They lost the game. They had a bad game. The Cleveland Browns had their number yesterday. I think that can be true, but I still feel like they're the best team in the NFC. And we're going to talk about some of these other teams, look at some other things before we get into it all. But their next 5, they're at Minnesota versus Cleveland at home, at Jacksonville versus Tampa Bay at home, and at Seattle. So we're going to pay attention to all that. We're going to see how Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel get back into the lineup and work with it. But the team who I know a lot of people were ready to propel, and deservedly so. I think that even though they haven't been playing their best football, they've still been winning, and there's something to be credited for that. But that's the Philadelphia Eagles. Let's look at this game. 4 turnovers. DeAndre Swift fumble. Jalen Hurts 3 interceptions. Now, I'm going to say the first 2 interceptions, I don't want to really harp on too much, but that third one, I don't know what type of window he thought he could fit that into, but you had a linebacker on the outside. You had a safety on the inside. You had Dallas. You can't make that throw. So I'm looking at all of those different things. And Jalen Hurts, we're going to have the conversation because I know a lot of people want to get on Brian Johnson. Okay, he's not Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen was a huge factor in Jalen Hurts' development. But like I said, I'm still looking at it and saying, okay, all of that can play a factor into it. But at some point, we got to say Jalen Hurts is not playing the elite level of football like we saw last year. And this is not saying he's having a bad year. Jalen Hurts is still having a good year. But we go to that game. Do we really want to put all of that on the coordinator? And I know Philadelphia Eagles fans, they're probably one of the strongest fan bases in the NFL. They're going to ride and die with Jalen Hurts because he's their guy. Brian Johnson, you've been with the team, but you haven't been the offensive coordinator. You've been quarterbacks coach, but we feel like Jalen Hurts, this is our guy that we're stepping out on the ledge for. This is the guy that's really our franchise and in our hearts. So I think that is kind of a scapegoat situation. When we look at Jalen Hurts, I think he's had some great to elite moments this season thus far. But when we talk about last night, it's just not good football, especially with the last interception. I understand you want to drive the football down the football field. It's just something that you have to pay attention to and say, okay, maybe Jalen Hurts is not playing like the guy we saw at all times last year. Last year was exceptional. Probably should have won the MVP, but they gave it to Mahomes. But talking about the game, penalties, 5 penalties for 46 yards. That's something I'm looking at. In the red zone, they were 2 of 3. Not really terrible. They were driving the football, just certain situations, maybe a turnover, maybe a third and out. We have to look at all of that and say, okay, this also plays into the situation, but only 80 rush yards. That's not like the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a team who runs the football. And when we look at the New York Jets, we already know what the defense entails. Bryce Huff had an extremely good game. He was getting off the edge. They could not handle him. Also, Lane Johnson dealing with the injury in that game. He went out. So we have to look at that as well. But Bryce Huff, Jermaine Johnson's of the world, Quincy Williams, that guy's playing like a very good linebacker right now, one of the tops in the game. But all of these guys, even without a Sauce Gardner, even without a DJ Reed, still playing a great game in the back end, in the front seven. Hats off to those guys because they won as well. And what we've probably been thinking, the Jets have a defense, but we have to see when Zach Wilson gets more comfortable, when he starts to kick it into gear just a little bit. He doesn't have to beat Aaron Rodgers, but if he's competent, they can win some games. And I thought that's what we saw. He didn't lose him the game, but he had a solid game, although not a great game. Good performance from Zach. I like to see him getting better, but I think Hassan Reddick had 2.5 sacks. We're looking at the defense for the Philadelphia Eagles. I do want to say they're dealing with a ton of injuries right now, and I mean a ton. Lane Johnson going out, but they also got some other guys who we could talk about. Reed Blankenship, Darius Slade, Jalen Carter, Avonte Maddox. We can keep going with that list. They got some guys out who are good football players, but however we get back into the football game, and I just think that this is where we get into the conversation. I think the toughest one, because for me, I still feel like, okay, I like San Francisco. Even with everything that happened, if the kick is made, we're not having that same conversation. I'm not saying it was a pretty game. I'm not saying it was their best game with Kyle Shanahan and Steve Wilkes. I'm not saying that at all, but I do think with the talent and the body of work, I have to look at that and pay attention to it because all of these teams have a loss. It's not like they don't. However, though, if you want to have the conversation, and I think it's one that I will listen to, one that I'll talk about those Detroit Lions, we're going to get into them. They're the next team featured in this video because I'm looking at the next 5 for the Philadelphia Eagles, and this can be a conversation of 1 seed versus actual chance to get to the Super Bowl. It can be both right now. Let me know what you think in the comments, but the next 5 for Philadelphia versus Miami, it's going to tell me a lot about Philadelphia. It's going to tell me a lot about that high-flying offense. Tyreek Hill taking people's phones and doing backflips. Also, at Washington, I just don't know what to think about Washington. One week they come out, Sam Howell 4 interceptions. And one week they come out, the guy's looking amazing. So I'm seeing that body of work. I'm still, holding some things out on Washington, but a pretty solid team, a team that's in the division. They know you a little bit. They could stump you, but I would favor Philadelphia in that game for sure. But I'm just saying that's something to look at, especially on the road. Their next game. So they got home at Miami, at Washington versus Dallas. A game that you have to look at. I know some people are not respecting the Dallas Cowboys right now. I am not one of those people. You had a dud on Sunday Night Football against San Francisco, but I just can't take away everything you have on that roster. I believe they'll come back with a vengeance. If they're going to win it all, that's to be determined, but they're going to come back and be competent. Very good team. So they got a bye week coming out of that. You got those next 3 games, and then you get into a bye week. And then your next 2 games, but I want to talk about the next 3 games because you're at Kansas City, you're home versus Buffalo, and you're home versus San Francisco. So you got a gauntlet. I want to see where you're sitting at coming out of your next 6 games, and that's going to tell me a lot. This can propel you into the best team in the NFC, or it can propel you into that 3rd spot. That's something that we really have to talk about. But it's a hard schedule. A good team, though. If anybody's built for it, the Philadelphia Eagles are. Jalen Hurts, we know his work ethic. He's not going out like that. You saw his face on the sideline yesterday. He's not living with that. He's going to go and work with his guys. A.J. Brown is having an amazing season. Probably on pace for a historical season if I check the stats again. So hats off to him. Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, very talented team, but we still got to see some things statistically, though. They're ninth in total defense, second in rush defense. What we kind of see from this team, 20th in pass defense, though. In comparison to last year, we wonder some things. Decide. We're wondering some things with the defensive scheme. Jonathan Gannon, for everything you don't like about him in Philadelphia, he didn't have this defense playing at that level. Now, the eye test and what I've seen, it's been up and down. Sometimes they've had dominant performances like we see with that defensive line, with that secondary. But, of course, they're dealing with some injuries right now. So is this Sean Desai, or is it some of the injuries, just trying to build that consistency within the size scheme? I think that's worth talking about. And also, they're 16th in scoring defense, so that's around middle of the pack right now. We're looking at the total offense, second in total offense. So Jalen Hurts, like I said, he hasn't had a bad season. They've been holding it down, running the football. And I was surprised against the Jets. Yes, they have a good run defense. They have all of those guys who we could talk about in the front seven, but to only get those rushing yards like you did, I was actually surprised because they're second in total offense. They still run the football, seventh in scoring. So I want to see what they continue to do. And do you want to propel this team that we're going to talk about in the Detroit Lions into second? And some people maybe even want to claim them as first. Let me know what you think in the comments, because I know we have the fans who watch it, but I want to see some people with the objective opinions. I want to see just a general feel of what you think. If you weren't a Detroit Lions fan, if you weren't a San Fran fan, if you weren't a Philly fan, where do you look at the landscape? I've given you all of the information. I haven't given you the Lions information, though, because they have a good resume. Okay, talk about the game yesterday. David Montgomery gets injured. This is the team. They've been leaning on David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs has been in and out of the lineup. David Montgomery has been in and out of the lineup. But Montgomery is the guy that they lean on. He can get 25 up to 30 carries in a given football game. That's why they brought him there. He's good at what he does, and he catches the football. However, he got hurt. So you still win that game. You go 9 of 16 on third down, only 40 rushing yards. Only 40 rushing yards. 9 of 16 on third down. You still win the football game. I want to say that again. Do you understand what I'm saying when you win a football game like that? This is a team who wants to be physical, who wants to run the football. Ben Johnson showed us that he could adjust, that he could elevate outside of what he already had and what he kind of built right there with that running game and establishing that. So I'm paying attention to that, and I think that you go 0 of 2 in the red zone, but you still put up 20 points, something that I have to pay attention to. You win the time of possession, even though you didn't have your run game going. And I'm looking at Tampa Bay. I thought Tampa Bay was a team to be respected coming into this game. Right now, they sit at 3-2, but Baker Mayfield didn't have the best game. I saw him miss Palmer wide open. I saw him miss some other guys, but overall, I think that's still a team that could be respected, especially in the South. And you pay attention to the defense. I think that when you have a Devin White, you have a Levante David, a Vita Vea, those guys flying around, and they stopped the run. Even when David Montgomery was in the game, they were still getting after those guys. So I paid attention to that. And okay, what do you do now? You don't have what you lean your hard hats on. What can you do right here? And they passed the ball. Jared Goff is a sneaky MVP candidate. You could say what you want about Goff. How many quarterbacks lose their best rusher? Actually, they lost their top two. Jahmyr Gibbs, he didn't start the game, but still he wasn't in the game. So we're looking at Montgomery. He started the game, then he went out. You don't have your top two rushers. You still win the football game with efficiency, throwing the football. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's a star. I've said this in past videos, but I'm saying it again. Had 12 for over 100 yards. We're paying attention to all of this and saying, we know we can't run the football like we want to right now. We know we can't shoot the clock out that way. We're going to our number one guy, and they could not stop it. I mean, Todd Bowles, all of those guys, they didn't have an answer for Amon-Ra. So I'm paying attention to that as well, and I think it's huge when you take that away. Outside of David Montgomery, I also had this charted down. They only had 26 yards on the ground. So David Montgomery had 14 rushing yards. You take them away, 26 yards on the ground. That's nothing. That's nothing for you to work with, and they still got it done. I'm looking at statistically, in their body of work, 5-1, had the loss to Seattle, but what are they doing thus far? They're 7th in total defense. An extreme turnaround, and I predicted it. I had the video. The Detroit Lions defense will be unrecognizable in 2023. They have that working for them. First in rush defense, a team that's getting after they're getting after it. We're looking at what they're doing against these teams that's trying to run the football. Alex Anzalone, Derek Barnes, Jack Campbell getting into the rotation. All the guys up front, Aleem McNeils, Isaiah Buggs, Aiden Hutchinson, getting after it on the ground. I love to see that. Shout out Kelvin Shepard, the linebackers coach, and Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator. And I'm looking at the pass defense. Now, if I had a question, I think this team is probably in the prime candidate to be a buyer at the deadline. and that's bringing in a guy on the edge. Now you look at offense. I think the offense is going to work. I've really been saying that. I see some receivers who could possibly get dealt, but I'm looking at those edge rushers. That's what wins you football games. When you go against San Francisco, when you go against Philadelphia, nobody's going to care that you got X and Y and Z at receiver. They want to know who's going to get after the quarterback, who's going to stifle the run game, because those two teams like to run the football. That's what's going to win you the football game. So I'm paying attention to that. There are some very good edge rushers who could be on the market, and we know them all by now. So I pay attention to that. Tied for ninth in scoring defense. So they're holding it up, and we know what they could do on offense. So if they just hold teams to around 18 to 20 points, they're in a good position to win a football game. Fourth in total offense. They were a top 5 offense last year and fourth in scoring offense. We look at the body of work. Okay, you want to say they lost to Seattle. They lost by 7 points. Okay, now you give up 37 points in that game. You score 30, though. I'm looking at that, and I'm saying, the Seattle Seahawks are a team that we have to pay attention to. And, of course, like I said, if Pete Carroll stays out of the way, they probably win yesterday against Cincinnati. But it's still like every team kind of has that dud right now. So after this week, this is why I talked about those next 5. Who did the Detroit Lions play in their next 5? They got at Baltimore. How do you like that? Lamar Jackson is playing extremely good football, but they can't score in the red zone. I'm probably going to make a film breakdown video on that because they have a huge problem. And they're driving the football down the football field. Roquan Smith, Kyle Hamilton, although he had the hit yesterday, controversial hit, he's flying around. Jadeveon Clowney's looking like he's making a little resurgence. Marlon Humphrey on the outside. They're flying around and playing great football, but they can't score. I mean, yesterday you had the punt return by Devin Duvernay. You get down in the red zone, you still don't even score. Stop kicking these field goals. I know you got Justin Tucker, but man, his leg has to get tired sometimes. So they got that game. You got to like that game. That's going to tell you a lot about this team. You got Detroit going at Baltimore. You got the Philadelphia Eagles playing home against Miami. How do you like those games? We can talk about it. Versus Las Vegas. That's a home game. Then they're at the Los Angeles Chargers. Those are the next 3. Then they're home versus Chicago. That's the 4th one. And they're home versus Green Bay. So I think these are games where really they have a chance to win them all. But we're looking at some of those teams. We know how the NFL is. You can have a dud on a Sunday. That's just how it works. You can have a dud on a Monday, Thursday. But I'm paying attention to this team. I gave you all of the information. I told you what I like about these teams. I told you some things that may not be working and maybe some injuries in certain places and certain pieces, but we have a lot of information. We got Jonah Jackson. He has to get healthy. Brian Branch has to get healthy. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. Shout out those guys. Everyone get healthy. San Fran guys get healthy. Philadelphia get healthy. Detroit get healthy. I don't want to see nobody playing unhealthy football, but it is the game that we love, the game that we watch. If they face each other in the playoffs, nobody's going to be 100% healthy. That's just the nature of it. But you just don't want to see injuries. I think that's really what I'm trying to say. And let me know in the comments. Of course, I want to see the landscape. I want to see this team is 1, and this is why I think that. I want to see this team is 2. This is why I think that. I want to see this team is probably not 1. That's why I think that. All of these things. But of course, don't forget to subscribe on the video. We're coming back with more of these. So like, comment, and subscribe. Let's push this thing out to the algorithm. Subscribe so you can see more because we're coming back at it. 24-hour sports. If you don't see a video, just know I'm thinking of something greater. That's going to do it for today's show because the battle in the NFC has officially begun. Thank you for watching.